Imagine walking into a restaurant, only to face blatant discrimination. Now, imagine being the secret owner of that very establishment. This is where our story begins, but it's far from where it ends. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and life-changing moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The gentle chime of the bell above the door barely registered in the bustling atmosphere of Riverside Grill. It was a Friday evening, and the restaurant was alive with the hum of conversation and the clink of cutlery against plates. Delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen, promising comfort and satisfaction to the diverse crowd of diners. Amidst this scene of contentment and indulgence, 68-year-old Evelyn Thompson stepped through the entrance. Her silver hair was neatly coiffed, and she wore a simple yet elegant navy blue dress that spoke of quiet sophistication. Evelyn's warm brown eyes twinkled with a hint of excitement as she surveyed the restaurant's interior. This visit to Riverside Grill was more than just a casual dining experience for Evelyn. After decades of hard work and strategic investments, she had recently acquired the entire Riverside franchise, a chain of upscale casual dining establishments spread across 3 states. Tonight, she wanted to experience one of her new restaurants as a regular customer before revealing her identity as the owner. Evelyn approached the host's stand, where a young woman greeted her with a smile. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Riverside Grill. How many in your party this evening?" "Just one, dear," Evelyn replied warmly. The hostess's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes darting to the crowded dining room. "I'm sorry, but we're quite busy at the moment. The wait for a table might be around 45 minutes to an hour. Would you like to wait at the bar?" Evelyn glanced at the nearly empty bar area, then back at the hostess. "I'd prefer a table if possible." "I don't mind waiting." With a nod, the hostess jotted down Evelyn's name and handed her a pager. "Please have a seat in our waiting area, and this will buzz when your table is ready." Evelyn settled into one of the plush chairs in the waiting area, her observant gaze taking in every detail of the restaurant's operations. She watched as several parties who arrived after her were seated promptly, but she remained patient. After all, she was here to observe, not to make a fuss. Nearly an hour passed before the pager finally buzzed in Evelyn's hand. She returned to the host's stand, where a different hostess now stood. This young woman led Evelyn to a small table tucked away in a corner, partially obscured by a large potted plant. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said before hurrying away. Evelyn smoothed her napkin across her lap and waited. And waited. She watched as diners around her were attended to promptly, their water glasses filled, and their orders taken. Yet, no one approached her table. After 15 minutes, Evelyn caught the eye of a passing waiter, a man in his mid-30s with slicked back hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. His name tag read, Frank. "Excuse me," Evelyn called out politely. "I haven't been served yet. Could you help me, please?" Frank's eyes swept over Evelyn, taking in her appearance and the simple gold chain around her neck. His lip curled almost imperceptibly. "I'm not your server," he said curtly. "I'll let them know you're waiting." Another 10 minutes passed. Evelyn's patience was wearing thin, but she maintained her composure. She had faced far worse in her life than poor service at a restaurant. Finally, Frank returned to her table, a look of barely concealed disdain on his face. "I'll be your server tonight," he said, his tone clipped. "What can I get you?" Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I'd like to start with a glass of water, please. And could I see a menu?" Frank's jaw tightened. "We're out of menus at the moment. I can tell you what we have." "I see," Evelyn replied, her voice level. "In that case, what would you recommend?" Frank's eyes narrowed. "Look, lady," he said, lowering his voice, "why don't you just order a side salad and be done with it? We both know you're not here for a full meal." Evelyn's eyebrows rose at his blatant rudeness. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me," Frank hissed. "We don't need your kind here, taking up space and barely ordering anything. There are other places better suited for people like you." The weight of Frank's words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt a familiar ache in her chest, the pain of prejudice she had faced countless times throughout her life. But along with that pain came a steely resolve. "I see," Evelyn said quietly. "In that case, I'd like to speak to your manager, please." Frank smirked. "Sure thing, lady. I'll get the manager right away." He turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Evelyn alone at her table once more. As she waited, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. She began to write, documenting every detail of her experience so far. Little did Frank know that his actions tonight would have consequences far beyond a simple complaint to management. The story of Evelyn Thompson and her unexpected confrontation at Riverside Grill was just beginning to unfold, and the waiter's racist behavior would soon lead to a series of events that would change lives and challenge deep-seated prejudices in ways no one could have anticipated. Evelyn sat at her corner table, pen poised over her notebook, her face a mask of calm despite the storm of emotions brewing within her. She had faced discrimination before, but never had she expected such blatant disrespect in an establishment she now owned. As she waited for the manager, her mind wandered to the journey that had brought her to this moment. Born in 1956, Evelyn had grown up in the midst of the civil rights movement. Her parents, both educators, had instilled in her a deep sense of pride in her heritage and an unwavering belief in the power of education and perseverance. Despite facing numerous obstacles, Evelyn had excelled in school, eventually earning a scholarship to study business at a prestigious university. After graduation, she had started her career in the food service industry, working her way up from a cashier at a small diner to managing several successful restaurants. Along the way, she had faced countless instances of prejudice, being passed over for promotions, dealing with difficult customers, and often being the only person of color in leadership positions. But Evelyn had never let these challenges defeat her. Instead, she had used them as fuel, driving her to work harder and smarter. She had saved diligently, invested wisely, and built a network of mentors and allies in the industry. When the opportunity to purchase the Riverside franchise arose, Evelyn saw it not just as a sound business decision, but as a chance to create positive change from within. A commotion near the kitchen doors snapped Evelyn back to the present. She looked up to see Frank engaged in a heated discussion with a man in a crisp white shirt and tie, presumably the manager. Their voices were low, but their body language spoke volumes. Frank's face was flushed, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. The manager, a man in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair, looked increasingly concerned as he listened. Finally, the manager nodded curtly to Frank and made his way to Evelyn's table. As he approached, he plastered on a professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I'm David Collins, the manager of Riverside Grill. I understand there's been some issue with your service tonight." Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Mr. Collins. I've been waiting for over an hour to be served, and when your waiter, Frank, finally approached my table, he was incredibly rude and made several discriminatory comments." David's smile faltered slightly. "I see. Well, I can assure you that Riverside Grill does not condone any form of discrimination. We pride ourselves on providing excellent service to all our guests." "Perhaps there was simply a misunderstanding." Evelyn's eyebrow arched. "A misunderstanding? Mr. Collins, your waiter told me, and I quote, 'We don't need your kind here.' He suggested I order only a side salad and leave. I don't believe there's much room for misunderstanding in those statements." David shifted uncomfortably. "I see. Well, I apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced. Please, allow me to comp your meal this evening as a gesture of goodwill." "That's very kind of you," Evelyn replied, her voice level. "But I'm not interested in a free meal. What I'm interested in is understanding how you plan to address this kind of behavior among your staff." David's professional demeanor began to crack. "Ma'am, I assure you we take these matters very seriously. We'll conduct an internal review and take appropriate action. Now, if there's nothing else, perhaps I can have another server take your order." Evelyn closed her notebook and placed it on the table. "Actually, Mr. Collins, there is something else. I'd like to speak with you in private, please. Is there somewhere we can talk?" Confusion flashed across David's face, but he nodded. "Of course. We can use my office. Please, follow me." As Evelyn stood to follow David, she noticed Frank watching from across the restaurant, a smug expression on his face. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Frank had no idea what was about to unfold. David led Evelyn through the bustling kitchen and into a small, cluttered office at the back of the restaurant. He gestured for her to take a seat in front of the desk while he settled into the chair behind it. "Now, Mrs. David began. "Thompson," Evelyn supplied. "Evelyn Thompson." David nodded. Mrs. Thompson, I want to assure you again that we take complaints like yours very seriously. Perhaps we could start by you telling me exactly what happened from your perspective. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Mr. Collins, before I do that, I think there's something you should know about me. She paused, meeting his gaze directly. As of last week, I am the new owner of the entire Riverside franchise, including this location. The color drained from David's face. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I'm sorry, what did you say? You heard me correctly, Evelyn said calmly. I acquired the franchise last week. I came here tonight to experience one of my new restaurants as a regular customer before making any formal announcements. I must say, it's been quite an illuminating experience. David slumped back in his chair, his mind clearly racing. Mrs. Thompson, I had no idea. We hadn't been informed of any change in ownership. That was intentional, Evelyn explained. I wanted to see how the restaurants operated without any influence from my presence as the owner. Unfortunately, what I've seen tonight is deeply troubling. David leaned forward, his face a mask of concern and fear. Mrs. Thompson, please, let me explain. Frank is, well, he's been with us for a long time. He's usually one of our best servers. I'm sure this was just a misunderstanding or a bad night. We can rectify this situation, I promise you. Evelyn held up a hand to stop him. Mr. Collins, what happened tonight goes beyond a simple misunderstanding or a bad night. It speaks to a culture that allows such behavior to exist and potentially thrive. As the new owner, I can assure you that this is not the kind of environment I intend to foster in my restaurants. She opened her notebook and slid it across the desk to David. I've documented everything that happened tonight, from the moment I walked in. I'd like you to read it, and then we can discuss how we're going to address this situation. As David began to read, his face growing paler with each line, Evelyn sat back in her chair. She felt no joy in this moment, only a grim determination to use this unfortunate experience as a catalyst for change. The next few hours would be difficult, but necessary. There would be hard conversations, policy reviews, and likely some staffing changes. But Evelyn was prepared for the challenge. She had not worked this hard and come this far to allow the racism she had faced all her life to persist in her own establishments. As she watched David's reactions to her notes, Evelyn began to formulate a plan. This incident, as unpleasant as it was, presented an opportunity, a chance to implement meaningful changes that could ripple out beyond just this one restaurant. It was time to turn this negative experience into a positive force for change. Little did Frank know, his actions tonight were about to set in motion a series of events that would not only transform Riverside Grill but potentially impact the entire franchise and beyond. The real work was just beginning, and Evelyn Thompson was more than ready for the challenge ahead. The ticking of the wall clock seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence of David Collins' office. The manager had just finished reading Evelyn's detailed account of the evening's events, and his face was a mixture of shock, shame, and fear. He placed the notebook carefully on the desk and looked up at Evelyn, struggling to find words. Mrs. Thompson, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. This is completely unacceptable. I had no idea. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression firm but not unkind. Mr. Collins, I believe you when you say you didn't know the extent of the problem. But that, in itself, is a problem. As a manager, it's your responsibility to be aware of what's happening in your restaurant, especially when it comes to how your staff treats customers. David nodded, a look of resignation on his face. You're absolutely right. I've clearly failed in my duties. I understand if you want my resignation. Evelyn considered him for a moment before responding. I'm not here to fire anyone, Mr. Collins. At least not yet. What I want is to understand how we got here and how we can fix it. But to do that, I need honesty and commitment from you. Can you give me that? David straightened in his chair, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Absolutely. I want to make this right. Good, Evelyn said, nodding. Then let's start by addressing the immediate issue. I want to speak with Frank, and I want you present for that conversation. After that, we're going to have a staff meeting. It's time to lay all our cards on the table. As David left to fetch Frank, Evelyn took a deep breath, centering herself for the difficult conversations ahead. She had faced many challenges in her life, but this one felt particularly personal. It wasn't just about addressing one incident of discrimination, it was about changing the culture of the business she now owned. A few minutes later, David returned with Frank in tow. The waiter's smug expression had been replaced by one of confusion and apprehension. Evelyn gestured for him to take a seat. "Frank," she began, her voice calm but authoritative, "do you know who I am?" Frank glanced uncertainly at David before responding. You're the lady from table 17, right? The one who complained." "That's correct," Evelyn said. "But I'm also Evelyn Thompson, the new owner of the Riverside franchise." The color drained from Frank's face as the implications of her words sank in. He opened his mouth to speak, but Evelyn held up a hand to stop him. "Before you say anything, I want you to listen carefully. Your behavior tonight was not just unprofessional, it was discriminatory and hurtful. It goes against everything this restaurant should stand for." Frank's eyes darted around the room, panic evident in his expression. "Mrs. Thompson, I can explain. It was a busy night, and There is no explanation that justifies treating any customer the way you treated me," Evelyn interrupted firmly. "But this isn't just about me. I want to know if this is how you regularly treat customers who look like me." Frank's silence was all the answer she needed. Evelyn sighed deeply. "Frank, I'm going to be honest with you. My first instinct is to fire you on the spot. But I've learned over the years that sometimes, the harder path is the one that leads to real change." She leaned forward, fixing Frank with an intense gaze. "So here's what's going to happen. You're suspended without pay for 2 weeks. During that time, you'll be required to attend diversity and sensitivity training. When you return, you'll be on probation for 3 months. If there's even a hint of discriminatory behavior during that time, you'll be immediately terminated. Do you understand?" Frank nodded mutely, a mixture of relief and shame on his face. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, "when you return, you'll be working closely with our new Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which will be forming immediately. You'll share your experiences and help us identify areas where we can improve. This is your chance to be part of the solution, Frank. I suggest you take it seriously." As Frank left the office, visibly shaken, Evelyn turned to David. "Now, Mr. Collins, it's time for that staff meeting. I want every employee who's here tonight in the main dining room in 10 minutes." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. The restaurant was closed early, much to the confusion of the remaining customers. As compensations were offered and apologies made, the staff gathered in the main dining area, a buzz of nervous energy filling the room. Evelyn stood before them, her presence commanding attention despite her small stature. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Evelyn Thompson, and as of last week, I'm the new owner of Riverside Grill and the entire franchise." A collective gasp went through the room, followed by murmurs of surprise and confusion. "I'm here tonight because of an incident that occurred earlier this evening," Evelyn continued. "An incident that has made it clear to me that we have some serious issues to address in this restaurant and potentially throughout our entire organization." Over the next hour, Evelyn laid out what had happened, careful not to name Frank specifically but making it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated moving forward. She spoke of her own experiences with discrimination, both as a customer and throughout her career in the restaurant industry. "But this meeting isn't just about pointing out what's wrong," Evelyn said, her voice filled with determination. "It's about charting a path forward. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing a series of changes." She outlined her plans: mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all employees, the formation of a diversity and inclusion committee, a review of hiring and promotion practices, and the establishment of a confidential reporting system for both employees and customers to report any incidents of discrimination or harassment. "I know change can be uncomfortable," Evelyn acknowledged, looking around the room at the mix of emotions on the faces before her. "But it's necessary. We have an opportunity here to not just make this restaurant better, but to set an example for the entire industry." As the meeting concluded and the shell-shocked staff began to disperse, Evelyn felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see an older waitress, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," the woman said, her voice quavering slightly, "I just wanted to say, thank you. I've worked here for 20 years, and I've seen a lot. But I never thought I'd see a day like this. You're giving me hope that things can really change." Evelyn reached out and squeezed the woman's hand, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "Change isn't easy, but with people like you on board, I believe we can make it happen." As Evelyn watched the last of the staff leave, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The events of the night had been challenging, but they had also crystallized her vision for the future of Riverside Grill. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready for the challenge. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, policy reviews, training programs to organize, and difficult conversations with the corporate office. But for now, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought of her parents and the values they had instilled in her, of all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this point. With a deep breath, Evelyn gathered her things and prepared to leave the restaurant. As she walked through the now quiet dining room, she paused to look around, seeing not just what the restaurant was, but what it could become. A place of true equality, respect, and excellence. The real work was just beginning, but Evelyn Thompson was ready. She had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment, and she wasn't about to let this opportunity for real, meaningful change slip away. The weeks following Evelyn Thompson's revelatory night at Riverside Grill were a whirlwind of activity. Each day brought new challenges, unexpected obstacles, and small victories as Evelyn worked tirelessly to implement the changes she had promised. On a crisp Monday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the incident, Evelyn sat in her newly established office at the Riverside Grill corporate headquarters. The space was still sparsely decorated, with just a few personal touches, a framed photo of her parents, a small potted plant, and a motivational quote on the wall that read, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." She rubbed her temples, fighting off the beginnings of a headache as she reviewed the latest reports from the restaurants. The transition had not been smooth, and resistance to change was proving to be a formidable opponent. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Evelyn called out. David Collins, the manager from that fateful night, entered the office. In the weeks since their first encounter, David had become one of Evelyn's strongest allies in pushing for change. He looked tired but determined as he took a seat across from her. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said, placing a folder on her desk. "I have the latest update on the diversity training sessions." Evelyn nodded, gesturing for him to continue. "We've completed the first round of training at all locations," David reported. "The feedback has been mixed. Some employees have been very receptive, but others—" He trailed off, his expression troubled. "Go on, David," Evelyn encouraged. "I need to hear it all, good and bad." David sighed. "There's been pushback from some of the longtime employees. They're saying the new policies are too restrictive, that we're overreacting to one incident. A few have even threatened to quit." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, absorbing the information. She had expected resistance, but the reality of it was still disheartening. "And what about Frank?" she asked. "Has he returned to work?" "Yes, he came back last week," David confirmed. "He's been different, quieter. He's doing his job, but some of the other staff have been giving him a hard time. It's creating tension in the team." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Change is never easy, David. We're asking people to confront their biases and alter behaviors that have been ingrained for years. It's going to be uncomfortable for a while." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "But we can't back down. Not now. We need to stay the course." David watched her, admiration clear in his eyes. "I agree, Mrs. Thompson. But how do we handle the resistance? We can't afford to lose too many experienced staff members." Evelyn turned back to face him, a determined glint in her eye. "We educate. We listen. We lead by example. And yes, if necessary, we let go of those who refuse to change. Quality of character is just as important as experience." She returned to her desk and opened her laptop. "I think it's time we scheduled a series of town hall meetings. I want to hear directly from the employees, their concerns, their suggestions, their experiences. We need to make them feel heard while also reinforcing our commitment to this new direction." David nodded, jotting down notes. "I'll start organizing those right away. Anything else?" "Yes," Evelyn said, her tone softening slightly. "I want you to keep an eye on Frank. Not to police him, but to support him. He made a terrible mistake, but he's also in a unique position to demonstrate real change. If he's sincere in his efforts to improve, we need to give him that chance. After David left, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. This wasn't just about one restaurant or even one franchise anymore. She was fighting against deeply entrenched societal issues, and some days, the task felt overwhelming. Her eyes fell on the photo of her parents, and she felt a renewed surge of determination. They had faced far greater obstacles in their time. She could handle this. The next few months were a test of Evelyn's resolve. The town hall meetings she organized were emotionally charged affairs. Some employees shared heartbreaking stories of discrimination they had faced or witnessed. Others argued passionately against what they saw as unnecessary changes to a system that wasn't broken. Evelyn listened to it all, responding with a mixture of empathy and firmness. She shared her own experiences, both as a customer and as a professional in the industry. Slowly, gradually, she began to see a shift in attitudes. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, a discrimination complaint at one location, a heated argument between staff members at another that nearly turned physical. Each incident was a blow, making Evelyn question if she was really making a difference. But there were victories too. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee, initially met with skepticism, began to gain traction. Employees started coming forward with ideas for improvement, taking ownership of the change process. Customer satisfaction scores, after an initial dip, began to rise steadily. One particularly challenging day, Evelyn found herself back at the original Riverside Grill location. She sat at the same table where her journey had begun, this time openly as the owner, observing the dinner service. To her surprise, she saw Frank approaching her table. He looked nervous but determined as he stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice slightly shaky. I wanted to apologize again, face to face. What I did that night was inexcusable. I've done a lot of thinking these past months, a lot of learning. I know words aren't enough, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing better, to being better." Evelyn studied him for a moment, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you, Frank," she said softly. "Your actions going forward will speak louder than any words. But I appreciate you taking this step." As Frank nodded and turned to leave, Evelyn called out, "Oh, and Frank, I'd like to place an order." A look of surprise crossed Frank's face, quickly replaced by a small, grateful smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. What can I get for you today?" As Evelyn placed her order, she felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small moment, but it represented everything she had been working towards: growth, understanding, and the possibility of real change. The challenges were far from over. Evelyn knew that changing a culture was a long-term process, not something that could be accomplished in a few months. But as she sat there, watching the diverse staff work together seamlessly, hearing the satisfied murmur of happy customers, she allowed herself to feel a sense of pride. Riverside Grill was evolving, not just as a restaurant, but as a microcosm of what society could be, a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel welcome and valued. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was progress. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow through the restaurant windows, Evelyn Thompson smiled to herself. The journey was far from over, but she was more convinced than ever that it was a journey worth taking. 1 year had passed since that fateful night when Evelyn Thompson walked into Riverside Grill as a customer and left as its determined owner. The autumn leaves were turning golden outside as Evelyn stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the city's finest hotel. Before her sat hundreds of people: Riverside Grill employees, industry leaders, community members, and press. Evelyn took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw David Collins, now the chief operating officer of Riverside Grill, sitting in the front row. Next to him was Frank, who had become an unexpected champion for change within the organization. Her gaze fell on familiar faces from that first town hall meeting, some who had initially resisted the changes but now sat with pride in their eyes. "Good evening, everyone," Evelyn began, her voice strong and clear. "1 year ago, I stood before a much smaller group and made a promise. A promise to transform Riverside Grill into a beacon of inclusivity and excellence in the restaurant industry. Today, I stand before you to share our journey and to celebrate how far we've come." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "It hasn't been an easy road. We've faced resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But we've also experienced growth, enlightenment, and countless small victories that have brought us to where we are today. Evelyn clicked a button, and behind her, a screen lit up with statistics and charts. In the past year, we've seen a 40% increase in customer satisfaction scores. Our employee retention rate has improved by 25%. We've opened 5 new locations, each one staffed with a diverse team that reflects the communities we serve. The room buzzed with impressed murmurs. But numbers only tell part of the story, Evelyn continued. The real measure of our success lies in the culture we've created. A culture where every employee feels valued, where every customer feels welcome, and where diversity is not just accepted, but celebrated. She gestured to a table near the front. I'd like to share a story about one of our employees, Sarah. A young woman with a hijab stood up, smiling shyly as the room's attention turned to her. 6 months ago, Sarah came to us as a shy, reserved hostess. She had faced discrimination in her previous job and was hesitant to fully engage with her coworkers or customers. Evelyn's voice softened with pride. Today, Sarah is one of our shift managers, known for her warm personality and exceptional leadership skills. Sarah, would you like to say a few words? Sarah approached the podium, her eyes shining. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Working at Riverside Grill has been life-changing for me. For the first time in my career, I feel truly respected and valued for who I am and what I can contribute. The training and support I've received have given me the confidence to grow, both personally and professionally. I'm proud to be part of a company that doesn't just talk about diversity, but lives it every day. As Sarah returned to her seat amid applause, Evelyn continued. Stories like Sarah's are why we do what we do, but our work is far from over. Today, I'm excited to announce the launch of the Riverside Grill Diversity in Hospitality Scholarship Program. A wave of excitement rippled through the room. This program will provide full scholarships to culinary school for promising students from underrepresented communities. We're not just changing our company, we're investing in the future of our industry. The applause was thunderous. Evelyn waited for it to die down before continuing. I'd also like to take a moment to address something personal, she said, her tone becoming more reflective. Many of you know that my journey with Riverside Grill began with an incident of discrimination that I experienced as a customer. What you may not know is that the waiter involved in that incident, Frank, is here with us today. A hush fell over the room as Frank stood up, his face a mixture of nervousness and determination. Frank's journey over the past year has been remarkable, Evelyn said. He took his mistake not as an ending, but as an opportunity for growth. He's become one of our most vocal advocates for change, leading workshops on unconscious bias and mentoring new employees. Frank, would you like to say something? Frank approached the podium, visibly emotional. Mrs. Thompson, I can never fully express how sorry I am for my actions that night, but I'm eternally grateful for the chance you gave me to learn and to change. This past year has opened my eyes in ways I never thought possible. I've confronted my own biases, learned about experiences so different from my own, and discovered a passion for promoting understanding and equality. Thank you for not giving up on me, and for showing me a better way. As Frank returned to his seat, Evelyn addressed the room once more. Frank's story is a powerful reminder that change is possible, that people can grow, and that second chances, when coupled with genuine effort and accountability, can lead to beautiful transformations. She straightened her shoulders, her voice filled with determination. As we move forward, Riverside Grill is committed to being more than just a restaurant chain. We aim to be a force for positive change in our industry and our communities. We will continue to challenge ourselves, to learn, and to grow. And we invite all of you to join us on this journey. Evelyn's voice softened as she concluded. I stand here today not just as the owner of Riverside Grill, but as a Black woman who has faced discrimination throughout her life. I stand here for every person who has ever felt unwelcome, undervalued, or invisible. And I stand here with hope that through our collective efforts, we can create a world where everyone, regardless of their race, gender, religion, or background, can walk into any establishment and be treated with dignity and respect. The room erupted in a standing ovation. As Evelyn looked out at the sea of faces, diverse in every way, yet united in purpose, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Evelyn found a quiet moment to herself. She stepped out onto the hotel's balcony, the cool night air a welcome respite after the excitement of the day. As she gazed out at the city lights, she thought about her journey. From that night as an unwelcome customer to this moment of triumph. She thought about her parents and wished they could see what she had accomplished. A gentle hand on her shoulder interrupted her reverie. She turned to see David, a warm smile on his face. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I just wanted to say, thank you for everything. You've not only changed Riverside Grill, you've changed all of us. You've shown us what true leadership looks like." Evelyn smiled, patting his hand. "Thank you, David. But this has been a team effort. We've all grown together." As David nodded and turned to leave, Evelyn called out, "Oh, and David? I think it's about time you started calling me Evelyn." David's smile widened. "Good night, Evelyn. See you bright and early tomorrow. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." "Indeed we do," Evelyn replied, turning back to the city view. As she stood there, Evelyn Thompson felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges to face. But she was ready for them. She had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change, a single incident into a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. Riverside Grill was more than just a success story now. It was a beacon of hope, a model for what businesses could achieve when they truly embraced diversity and inclusion. And Evelyn Thompson, once an unwelcome customer, now stood as a respected leader, a changemaker, and an inspiration to all who dare to dream of a more equitable world. As she took one last look at the twinkling city lights before heading back inside, Evelyn smiled to herself. This wasn't an ending, she realized. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. For her, for Riverside Grill, and for all those whose lives they would touch in the years to come. Thank you for listening to Evelyn's inspiring story of transformation at Riverside Grill. If you enjoyed this tale of perseverance and positive change, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people with these important stories. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking narratives that challenge perspectives and celebrate diversity. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on our weekly uploads of real-life stories that make a difference. Join our community of listeners who believe in the power of storytelling to create a more inclusive world. Hit subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together.